Thank you for joining us for the first recording of The Exchange, a podcast series focusing on casual conversations with notable life science contributors, narrated by myself, Ken Mullinix. A little background on me: I'm the U.S. Head of Surgical Services at Biomir. Prior to this, I was a consulting preclinical orthopedic spine surgeon, and prior to that, I was a clinical orthopedic spine researcher. I actually met our next guest on an orthopedic knee case, and I've since had the privilege of calling him both a mentor and a friend. He's a man of over 40 years of preclinical research experience. He is an amazing wealth of knowledge, and he's also humble. So without further ado, let's introduce our very first guest on The Exchange, Dr. Vince Mendenhall. Hey, Vince.
Hey, Ken.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Not bad, not bad. So this is Dr. Vince Mendenhall, wealth of medical research knowledge, and I'll let him take over from here. Vince, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got started in the CRO world?
In the CRO world? By accident. No, well, I'm a veterinarian, and of course, like all people that go to vet school, I originally just thought I would be have my own practice and all that. But I had always wanted to be in surgery. Actually, before I wanted to be a veterinarian, and so I only really went to vet school because my first wife convinced me that it didn't take as long to get to become a vet, and so then we could start having kids soon earlier. And so I really got into vet school just by accident as well.
Wow.
And I almost quit the first week. Got to go put your hand up a cow's rear. And I said, "You've got to be kidding." But I managed to finish it and actually ended up liking it quite a bit, the whole idea. And I'd always liked animals a lot. I hadn't really had much experience with them, so it was just an accident. But I'd still wanted to do just surgery. And in vet school, I don't teach you much surgery except for spays and neuters, especially back in those days. So I graduated when I was quite young. I was only 23. And so my wife, a job opportunity opened up in New Zealand. So my wife and I went there for 3 years. It was mostly a large animal practice, but it was also socialized. So, in other words, the veterinary medicine for livestock and working dogs in particular was free, paid for by the government. So we got to see a lot of things that American large animal vets don't get to see. In other words, we got to see cows when they were just starting to get sick rather than just before they were starting to die. And the working dogs, most of their issues were broken legs. And so I got, that was quite a bit of the surgery that I first started, although veterinary orthopedics was not that big at the time. And so I just had to transfer and got a lot of information from orthopedic friends of mine, actually, that became friends of mine because I asked them for help. And all that was in New Zealand. And so we could do quite complicated fracture repairs in dogs for no cost to the client. And that's where I really got interested, but also found out that I didn't know what I was doing. And so I decided I would try to go back to get an internship and become board certified in surgery. Unfortunately, New Zealand did not have a vet school at that time, and so I wanted to stay in New Zealand, but I couldn't unless I got rid of my American citizenship. I didn't want to do that, so I came back to the States, Colorado State, and turns out I didn't have good enough grades to get into the internship program, but I did have good enough grades to get into the research program. So thank goodness I didn't have good enough grades in vet school. because my colleagues that were getting board certified were spaying dogs and cats, and I ended up doing triple spondylectomies and spinal cord repair and heart and lung transplants. So it was I landed where I exactly wanted to be.
It's
So the
interesting how that works.
yeah, and it was just like you say, how did I get into the CRO business? Well, that's how I got into experimental surgery. And my first
Mhm.
job actually was at 3M company. So I've been in industry all my life, really, except for a few years. Um, and there, 3M was starting to develop medical devices and in all specialties. And so again, I had great mentors. Engineers would usually design something with the help of a champion physician, surgeon, and then we would work on animal models and surgical techniques to put these devices in. Then they would go back to their practice, and I got to do all the surgery. So again, it was a dream come true. There was really no financial hindrances. I could build and buy whatever I wanted to, and it was quite amazing for about 18 years.
Oh, wow.
But then 3M decided to go out of medical devices for a couple of reasons. Mostly post-it notes and silicone breast lawsuits. Post-it notes generate a little over $100 million a year in revenue, not I mean in profit, not just in revenue. And at the time, medical because silicone interestingly never went through the biocompatibility testing. It was just grandfathered. You know, that's when you used to build total hips in somebody's garage and then
Oh, wow.
go implant it.
Sure. All the metal on metal J and
Yeah,
J problems. Yeah.
yeah. And so they were getting $100 million a year in lawsuits for silicone breast leakages, and because there was no background to say that silicone was not the cause of these autoimmune diseases, because it had never been tested. So they decided, post-it notes, medical devices, probably not going to get a whole lot of lawsuits from notes falling off the wall.
Paper
So
cuts.
I greatly decreased the amount of work they were doing, but they did support implants for about 5 years. So for like most companies. So for about 5 years, I traveled the world. Actually, I went to 48 countries and assisted physicians in putting in implants that we'd help develop in animals and assisting them in how to put it into humans. So for about 5 years, I assisted and sometimes was primary human surgeon. I could do that outside of the States because they're not quite as litigious there.
Right.
And but that only goes on for about 5 years. Plus, it really was a big. It got to be really bad because I would be gone for periods of like 6 to 8 weeks, and then home for a week, and then gone for 6 to 8 weeks. And so it began just to really starting to get burned out. And that's how I got into the CRO industry because 3M really said, well, I guess we don't need you anymore. And so they gave me a very nice severance package, and I had started to make friends with Steve Nemi, who was running Genzyme Transgenics at the moment in the place where you are now sitting. And we made contacts, and I went out there and did some things, but not necessarily surgically related. And they had just Mason Laboratories at the time in Worcester had just was trying to transfer from doing just mouse and rat toxicology to contract toxicology. And so they needed an attending veterinarian, and I just happened to be at the right place at the wrong time because I was not really built to be an attending veterinarian, but they hired me anyway. And shortly after, and that was in Worcester. And shortly after that, the study came up that involved intrathecal laminectomy. And so everybody was worried about where they were going to find somebody that could do that. And I said, well, I can do that and have done it hundreds of thousands of times. And Mike Wind was the boss at that time. And he said, really? And so, yeah, we did our first continuous infusion intrathecal study in dogs back in about 1993,
Interesting.
94. And then we were able to turn, because I had his support and very important support of management. They had well, they had the rooms that you have now, but they're not in as good a shape as they were. And we built them, and they bought all kinds of instruments and things. And I remember they for studies that we didn't know we would get or not, but we did, and we turned the place around from mouse and rat toxicology of about, what was it, about 25, 30 people to over 100 and some odd people and $26 million or more a year in revenue. You look at Mike Wyand's CV, he points that out quite well.
Really?
So that's how I got into the CRO business heavily, and mostly it first started with pharmacokinetics and directed toxicology, so vascular access ports.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to that time, we'd been using percutaneous catheters, which have all their big issues with infection primarily.
Sure.
We're able to change that over to vascular access ports, which is a huge device in comparison to the size. But at that time, the Worcester facility did all species too. It was mostly SIV in monkeys at the time, but they shifted to doing everything up to cows. In fact, we did our first total heart work in cows there, and lots of sheep and pigs, and we got into the interventional stuff. And especially with pigs. And so it really built up great. And then the interventional people came in and with pig coronary artery stents. And that was extremely profitable for a number of years. You could do quickly, once you learned how, you could do 10 to 15 pigs a day with a coronary stent at $5,000 each. But it was a big balloon. And I was never really good at video games, and I could catheterize a coronary eventually. Sometimes it would take 5 minutes, and sometimes I'd give up after a few hours. And so I just stuck with incisional surgery, and while all of the guys in the front, the interventionists, were getting all the platitudes and everything, I was in the back just maintaining things.
And the X-rays, taking the X-ray dose for you.
Oh yeah, but also mostly, so the surgery I was doing still then was colony telemetry and pharmacokinetics, mostly under the direction of Peter Markham, who became the sort of the god of PK.
Mm-hmm.
And it built up so much that we had colony animals enough that we had, I think at one time we had 30 people devoted only to colony surgery. So we were doing colony surgery every day. Our motto was, tell us where you want the tip of the catheter and we'll put it there. So we did bile ducts, portal veins, hepatic arteries, still intrathecal a lot. And you want it wherever you wanted it. And then the telemetry took off as well. That whole back room on the third floor was nothing but telemetry.
Wow.
And we worked with DSI quite a bit in developing some of their new stuff. We were so good. We were so good, in fact, and then we moved second OR out to Southbridge and did mostly nothing but pigs out there, and occasional sheep and goats, but still mostly those stayed down in Worcester.
Really?
That was about the time I changed the name to Primedica from Genzyme Transgenics, and got to be really noticed. So Charles River acquired us, of course, and then it all went away. Mm-hmm. But not until we built that facility out at Shrewsbury, which was, if you look at the design, it was completely surgically oriented. The surgery rooms, the two huge rooms, and everything else was in the center of the building, and all the animal stuff radiated out from there.
Yeah, that's perfect.
But Charles River wanted to stick mostly to toxicology work, and so we didn't get the surgery business, sort of went away.
Right.
So did I, because that's the way it goes. That was my short little intervention time in university. I created a job at Wake Forest University primarily for personal reasons, to move to Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And I ended up mostly helping physician residents with the surgical portion of their NIH grants. But that was not very satisfying. And so I became a full-time consultant back in 2015 and have been doing the same thing now that I used to do, but for quite a number of clients other than just one CRO.
Kind
So
of different.
basically, that
You're
was
constantly.
it's a long way of answering your question. How I
No, that
got
was great. I mean,
into the CRO business. It was a
certainly. If
bunch
you
of
would you recommend this path to a graduating vet?
if they're into research, yeah, of course.
Mm,
It's absolutely fantastic. Don't have near the restrictions financial wise that you do as a practicing vet. You know, you probably know the suicide rate in veterinarians is right up there with everybody else. In fact, for a while it was number one. And one of the primary reasons for that is that in vet school, we're taught how to do all these things that physicians are taught. Um, with very complicated stuff with CTs and MRIs and transplants and so forth and so on. But it's only in a few geographical areas that people will pay for that. Insurance companies for animals usually don't cover very much beyond the necessities.
right.
And so we know how to fix the condition, but all we end up doing is charging $30 for a dose of euthyzol. And after a while, that gets to you. In research, you can treat the animals much better, actually, than they're treated in a clinic, at least for the time that they're there, but they're making a contribution and you make their lives as painless and as happy as they can,
Right.
especially the large animals when you can get them outside. So no, it has lots of advantages. The disadvantages, of course, is that the lifespan of the animal is dictated. Um, when you're in the business for a while, you begin to think that there's financial restrictions, but it's nothing like practice. So yeah, I would highly recommend it.
What do you
Not
think's
only,
the
yeah,
yeah,
because but I remember I'm only stuck in surgery. Lab animal vets, I don't, in my opinion, don't have near the exciting time that I do.
sure.
But lab animal vets are able to create the environment that the animals that are under their care, at least, are very, very well cared for, and that makes a difference.
Yeah, definitely. I you and I have obviously done some cases together, and I
Yeah.
it was amazing to rely on your knowledge, your veterinary knowledge, especially when things go south. And we know we had a couple cases, can't really talk about, but
No, no.
it was fun to watch you jump into action and
Well, thanks.
handle things. Sure.
That's in fact, this just recently came up as an issue. I do a lot of training now and teaching because I'm theoretically supposed to be thinking about retiring.
Hmm.
And so I'm teaching a lot of people like I was trying to teach you, but you already knew what to do.
Some
So,
parts.
but you got to turn the student loose, and depending upon how management looks on that, when you say the student can certainly do the surgery from now on, you got to remember that what makes you a surgeon is not the ABCD technical part of doing the procedure, but knowing what to do when something goes wrong, because something nearly always will start to go wrong at least. And all that comes about is from experience. So if you have um, an unexpected death rate or complication rate in what you're doing, the last thing you want to do is to stop doing it. It's like riding a bike. If you fall off the bike, well, you're never going to learn how to ride a bike if you don't get back on it, and you're never going to learn how to do surgery unless you keep doing it and try to evaluate why there were complications or what you did wrong or weren't expecting in different animal anatomy and physiology, because everyone is a little bit different.
So that takes me to a good point. I wanted to ask you, what do you feel about sponsors providing some sort of data on how, for example, let's just say CSF, let's say intrathecal catheterization.
Yeah,
I've come to find that, it's difficult to get, I guess, kind of feedback on, because we never really see, as a CRO, we never actually have our hands on the data.
that's
And
true.
coming from research, for me, it's like I want to do the surgery and then I want to see the results. Okay, how did I do? Is this right? Is this good?
Exactly.
And
No,
do you ever see sponsors doing that, or saying, hey, we recommend that you change this? Or
sponsors share the data. I mean, especially if you're doing the whole study in a house and you're the study director, well, you share the data with the sponsor.
right,
Uh,
but a lot of the
something
testing, especially in CSF, global transduction, everything we ship out, and then it gets tested, and then
exactly, and
yeah,
also with the new biologics and genes and adenovirus take-ups and all that sort of carry on. Yeah, the sponsor usually does all that evaluation.
right,
Um, but yeah, you need to know the results. That's
right,
how we came about with the intrathecal method that we do, actually, because I insisted, before we were just doing lumbar punctures like everybody else wants to
mm-hmm.
do. And you'd have CSF dripping out of your needle, not thinking that the other end of the bevel might be epidural. And so you go ahead and dose, and you got CSF dripping out. So you must be in the right spot, right? Well, if turns out that maybe over half of their test material went epidural or subdural and
Mm-hmm.
didn't go intrathecal. Whereas in humans, of course, where they usually do the lumbar puncture at L5S1 or L4-5 is quite deep. It's on the order of 4 to 5 millimeters deep or more. And the bevels of the needles are, a millimeter or more. Our intrathecal space, especially in monkeys, is less than a millimeter. All you have to do is look at a histological section.
Right, very tight, and you
So,
don't have
yeah,
the large cauda equina kind of
exactly.
helping you out.
And so when sponsors were actually honest with me and said, these results are all over the map, but some places we really like them and some places they're not. So what are you doing that they should be so different? And that's when I started really looking into it. They weren't really criticizing me. They were telling me that maybe something was a little wrong.
Hmm.
And so when you start looking into it, the best way to do it is we now know, at least even in sheep, the intrathecal space is really small. And you can get a better stick at the L7S1 or L6S1 space in a large animal than you can in a monkey, but certainly not all the time.
Right.
And so that's how we came up with the current technique of then the Gertie Marx needle
Mm-hmm.
was actually first intended for humans for basically the same reason, but it's because, and that's why it's so short and comes off the side.
Right.
But but even that is way too long for a blind stick in most animals. That's why we do the small little dinky laminectomy, so you can see it and watch the bevel disappear under the intrathecal space.
I even stopped doing that. I'm on to even
Ah,
for a direct stick, I'll do the surgical cut down, and I'll put the catheter in. I'll
oh,
and then I'll do a dural sealant, and then I'll dose and I'll take the catheter out for that
Oh,
exact reason that I want to make sure we are certainly intrathecal.
okay.
And we
Well,
have fluoroscopy now too, so that helps.
well, sure.
Yeah.
Well, good job, Ken.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I only put catheters in if I'm going to leave them in,
Mhm.
but generally, but that's a good idea to use the dural sealant, etc. At least you're still exposing it.
Right.
See, that's how it has evolved.
Hmm.
When we first started doing intrathecal space way back in the 90s, it was if we wanted to collect CSF many different times, we would go ahead and put it in the catheter. If we were going to do just a dose, well, the conventional wisdom, even in clinical veterinary medicine, is just to do a puncture. But once you look at your results, as you say, and what also makes you a good surgeon too is to constantly criticize what you're doing and never get lackadaisical or laissez-faire. And I presented that at ASR. Have you ever heard of or listened to or read any of Atul Gawande's work?
No.
He's an Indian neurosurgeon that's quite well known, along not as well known as Deepak um, Chopra Deepak,
Yeah, sure.
but Atul Gawande is famous on TED Talks especially,
Okay.
and he just recently had one that compared surgery, the profession of surgery, to sports, to playing basketball or football. And so you get to be really, really good football or basketball player, like LeBron James, I guess. But you teach and teach and teach, and the sports person never in his entire career, even though it may be short, never goes anywhere without a coach. Whereas a surgeon goes to school, learns a bunch of stuff, starts doing stuff, and nobody ever talks to him or her again about it. And so he decided, he would have one of his mentors that had since retired come in and watch him do surgery. He was now like 20 years into doing neurosurgery. And he thought it was kind of ridiculous, but maybe it would be fun anyway. And the TED Talk is amazing. You should look it up on YouTube.
Okay.
He said, of course, the cases are beautiful, and I didn't expect my mentor of 20 years ago to have any comments at all, except platitudes and accolades about how wonderful I was. Instead, he had several pages of notes of little things I was doing wrong. Like lifting my arm when I was uncertain with my face, that I didn't even notice if the lights were still on the incision or not. I didn't have a headlight, but still,
Right.
and other little things. And so he started paying attention and inviting people to criticize his surgery from then on. And he noticed that all of a sudden, when he paid attention to these other people, that his complication rate was decreasing quite a bit. And of course, you hate to say that in a public forum, that a surgeon even has a complication rate.
Right.
And so that's what I mean. I just learned from you. So there you go.
Yeah, I think that's where the checklist manifesto developed. And
Could be, yes.
yeah,
Yeah, you're
yeah,
right.
and getting everyone on board and letting people speak up. I think there's a big, nobody wants to contradict the surgeon, but many
Oh,
times
no,
you have
no.
to.
I've never operated in that environment. I was taught that by my mentor way back when. You've got to have a flat hierarchy because the surgeon will learn more from the techs than from another surgeon.
Right.
At least that's a bit my case.
Yeah.
If you want a successful career, surround yourself with competence.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely right.
Be open for suggestions.
Yeah, definitely. So Vince, what do you think's the next frontier
Right.
of preclinical research? One last question and then I'll let you go.
Okay, well, I think you may have noticed, in fact, I'm sure you've noticed since you have the job that you have right now. It was finally verbalized to me that this big shift in NIH funding and therefore research interests is now away from cardiovascular and onto neuro. And that's why, when I first wanted to think about retiring, why I stopped doing cardiovascular work, and I thought I would end up with half the amount of work or more that I had. And all of a sudden it just doubled. And it turns out that NIH is now funding neuro in preference to cardio. And I think a lot of that is, of course, Alzheimer's and other disease-related things, but the recognition that the importance that the CSF is playing, and that's why you're getting so many intrathecal studies,
Sure.
As the lymphatic system of the central nervous system. Nobody had really realized that until not too long ago, and how important sleep is in that as well, because the CSF only acts as a lymphatic system when you're asleep.
Right.
And
Those rhythmic
so,
contractions.
yeah, and a
Yeah.
lot of the research now in neuro diseases, and especially Alzheimer's, and not so much for the TIAs, because that's more a cardiovascular thing, but Parkinson's, Huntington's, it's all, and all these other things
Mhm.
unrelated that nobody seems to know anything about, that may in fact be due to insufficient attention to things related to the cerebrospinal fluid. And so I think that's at least our next frontier, is the more wonderful things we can do there. And still nobody knows what the circulation of CSF is. We all assume it goes from the ventricle to the tail, but
Right.
it doesn't
Choroid
do,
plexus and
but it doesn't do
right. Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah,
that.
it really
Yeah,
is.
that's one of the things too. You dose into the ventricle as an attempt to treat something locally, but the ependymal cells that are lining the ventricular system are secretory. Very little of them are absorptive.
Right.
The absorptive down in the arachnoid villi in the intrathecal space, which could be just as more important over the brain than it is over the spinal cord.
Mm.
And certainly you do get some absorption of drugs administered to the ventricle, but it's more a mass osmosis issue than it is an actual absorptive issue. So,
Interesting.
but we're just beginning to learn things like that. So in other words, if you did a lumbar puncture and a CSF tap from the cisterna magna
Mm.
in 1 minute of each other, you would find that most of your drug that you gave lumbar is already equal in the intrathecal space, because it's a sac. That's what thecal stands for, remember?
Right.
From the Greek.
Right.
So that's where I'd say the most research is going to be directed, at least in the next 5 or 10 years, is more neural-based than
Interesting.
cardiovascular.
Right. And all AAV vectors and CRISPR type gene editing. Is
Oh
that?
yeah,
Yeah.
from a test article standpoint, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
For
Mm-hmm.
gene editing, when I went to school, it was big A, little a. I don't understand genetics at all. With the alphabet soup with names this long.
Right.
But more power to them. But the more we as little technical assistants can help them, the molecular biologists and the geneticists understand more what's going on, the better it is. Nobody does anything by themselves. It has to be a total team effort.
Sure.
So,
Yep. All right, Vince. Hey, thanks for talking with us.
oh, geez,
And
that was fun.
yeah, I had a great time. You're such a wealth of knowledge that
Yeah. I worked
yeah,
did Brian tell you? I worked with him a couple of weeks ago.
he did. He did.
Yeah, it was just like two surgeons getting together. He didn't like Ioban, and I told him he had to use
I
Ioban.
knew he wouldn't like it, but I use it constantly. I use it
He didn't
constantly
he
now.
didn't like Avogard because I had to wait for try. He didn't like the fact that we didn't get started until 8 instead of 7.
Yeah, Brian can be kind of militant about certain things. Yeah.
But he was certainly a good surgeon. We
Oh yeah.
did some disc injection.
Yeah.
And it's funny, he kept calling this Carson punch. I thought, what the hell is a punch?
Oh, the rongeur. Yeah.
And it's the Carson rongeur, but he was calling it a punch. And we brought out, well, this is the only thing we have that's a Carson. He said, that's a Carson punch. And I said, no, it's a Carson rongeur.
It's the same when you and I work together. Remember, I'm using human terms, you're using vet terms, all of our instruments are different.
Yeah.
It's funny.
We'll give my regards to everybody there at Biomare.
Yeah, will do. Thanks again, Vince. It was great talking to you.
I don't go there anymore, you know.
You got to come by.
Yeah,
anytime you're in town, come on by.
Okay.
All right, Vince.
Take care, man.
Take care.
Yeah, you too.
Yep. Bye.